Have you ever played a game that everyone ignored, but you just thought it was pure genius? Today we're going to count down 12 titles that tanked yet deserve a spot in the Gaming Hall of Fame. Let's get started. Prey is an underrated masterpiece, but it never got the attention it deserved. So why did it fail to reach its audience? Well, mainly it was because of poor marketing. The trailers totally missed what made the game special, its tense atmosphere, mystery, and unique mechanics. Instead, they made it look like a generic space shooter. They also failed to showcase the game's most impressive moments, like spacewalks or creepy encounters, which could have hooked viewers. On top of that, Bethesda's demo was a secret weapon that could have sold the game, but it was released quietly and it wasn't promoted enough. The lack of early reviews and misaligned influencer outreach also didn't help. All in all, Prey's downfall was a classic case of failing to communicate what made it great. And it's a shame, because it's a game more people should have definitely played. Even though critics loved the story, characters, and vibes of Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, sales were disappointing. Mainly because of its link to the poorly received Avengers game previously. They thought it would be the same, repetitive and heavy on the microtransactions, despite being a different single-player experience. Plus, Square Enix marketing was really bad, and many only discovered the game when it was free on Epic. Still, the game's praised for its sharp writing, great characters, killer soundtrack, and stunning visuals, making it a hidden gem that finally got its dues later on. Duke Nukem Forever FLOP is a classic case of too long, too lost. It took nearly 15 years to make, bouncing between studios and engines, and that chaos killed its vibe. By the time it finally launched in 2011, it felt totally outdated, like a relic from the early 2000s. So why did it fail? First, the insane development cycle meant no clear vision, just a mishmash of ideas that never truly came together. The gameplay was stale, the graphics looked old, and the humour? Well, while there's a place for it, it felt juvenile and uninspired. Plus, it was riddled with bugs and technical messes. And despite all the hype, the industry had ultimately moved on. The final product couldn't keep up with modern standards, making Duke Nukem Forever a huge letdown. Proof that rushing development and losing focus can sink even the biggest franchises. Alien Isolation didn't exactly flop, but it definitely didn't live up to Sega's sales expectations initially. Even though critics and fans loved it, a bunch of things held it back. First off, making a detailed story-driven horror game like that isn't cheap. Selling just under 2 million copies wasn't enough to make it a huge success financially. Then there's the fact that Sega probably had sky-high hopes for these sales, which didn't pan out. Plus, the bad reputation from the disastrous Aliens Colonial Marines in 2013 didn't help. People were wary of investing in another Alien game from the same publisher. Marketing was another challenge. Alien Isolation is a different kind of experience, more stealth and survival horror, less action, and that made it tricky to sell to fans expecting a more typical alien shooter or action game. And while most reviews were pretty positive, some critics pointed out that it was slow or that the AI and story weren't perfect. Not exactly the hype boost you want. On top of that, the game's development was reportedly pretty rough. A stressful environment, high turnover, and internal issues that probably affected the final product. So a mix of high costs, lofty expectations, bad past experiences, and marketing struggles meant Alien Isolation didn't hit the sales numbers Sega had hoped for. But eventually it did come into the light as a really great game that people love. Sometimes even the best games just don't get the break they deserve. Vampire the Masquerade is often called a flawed masterpiece. Critics loved its deep writing, rich story, and impactful choices, earning it an 80 on Metacritic. It's been praised as a near-perfect RPG with a ton of variety from clan to dialogue options and memorable characters. Many reviewers compared it to classics like Fallout, Baldur's Gate, and Deus Ex, some even calling it Deus Ex with vampires. However, the game wasn't perfect. Its later sections suffered from repetitive combat and less engaging missions, especially for social or stealth-focused builds. Still, its storytelling and mature themes were highly praised, with some calling its script the best they'd seen. Critics really loved the voice acting, the sharp dialogue, and the adult themes handled with intelligence. But the game had serious issues at launch. Bugs, long load times, poor AI, and a clunky combat. The game also had problems with its release. The publisher rushed to get it out, and unfortunately it released at the same time with other big competitors, completely wiping it out. But despite its flaws, the game remains a cult classic. An ambitious RPG that set a high bar for narrative depth and player choice, even if its technical problems held it back. It's a game that is still worth playing today for its storytelling and atmosphere. We're just not going to talk about the obvious elephant in the room. You can go to my other video for that if you want. Despite rave reviews and a loyal fanbase, Psychonauts just didn't sell well, and there are a few reasons why. It released into a crowded market, and its publisher Majesco was struggling financially, so marketing was pretty limited. Plus, it was supposed to be an Xbox exclusive, but Microsoft pulled out late in development, which caused delays and confusion. The game itself also had some rough spots: slow start, tough final level, and humour that just didn't land for everyone. And on top of that, the quirky style was a bit niche, so it didn't catch on with a huge audience. All these factors, bad timing, publisher issues, tricky gameplay, and not enough marketing held it back, but over time, it's become a cult hit, paving the way for the long-awaited sequel, Psychonauts 2. Okami is loved by critics and fans alike, but it didn't quite hit the big time when it launched. It's often seen as a hidden gem, but the sales were pretty disappointing, and that led to the closure of its developer, Clover Studio. The timing to launch in this game was really tricky. It launched around the PlayStation 3 and competed with titles like Zelda. Plus, the industry was shifting towards more of an online multiplayer, which made solo adventures like Okami less appealing. Gameplay didn't help either. Some found it inconsistent, slow, or a little bit clunky, especially with puzzles and combat. And according to the director, the team was a little bit weaker than it should have been, which affected how the game turned out. And in the end, despite its really unique charm, Okami's release timing, niche appeal, and gameplay quirks kept it from reaching a wider audience. But like many games on this list, over time, it's gained a loyal following and is now recognised as a true artistic masterpiece. Enslaved Odyssey to the West got great reviews, but didn't really find its audience, and didn't sell well either, and there are a few reasons for that. It launched in October 2010, right in the middle of a crowded release schedule with other big games, so it struggled to stand out. Second, the gaming tastes were shifting away from story-driven single-player adventures like this one, towards multiplayer and other genres. On top of that, the game had some technical problems, frame rate drops, bugs, and frustrating checkpoints that hurt the experience. But the big issue was the controversial core theme. Some critics felt the game handled the topic poorly or wasn't clear enough about its message, and that just didn't sit well with everybody. For obvious reasons. Plus, the marketing, again, wasn't very strong. So many players didn't know about it, and all these factors meant that despite its quality, Enslaved just didn't sell enough to get a sequel, and its story ended there. The Last Guardian got a lot of praise for its emotional story and beautiful atmosphere, but it also faced quite a lot of criticism. Many players were frustrated with the technical issues, clunky controls, and gameplay feeling a little bit outdated, especially considering how long it took to develop and that it launched on powerful hardware like the PS4. So what went wrong? Performance was a big problem. Even on PS4, players experienced frame rate drops and stuttering, which was disappointing given the game's relatively simple graphics. The camera often got stuck or wouldn't work properly, and the controls for both the boy and Trico could feel unresponsive, leading to a lot of frustration. Trico's AI was also really inconsistent, sometimes responsive, sometimes not, which made the creature feel like less of a real partner and more like a frustrating puzzle. Gameplay-wise, the game's slower pace and reliance on Trico's actions could feel tedious, especially when there wasn't much guidance, leaving players confused about what to do next. It also felt like The Last Guardian was borrowing a lot from their older titles, Ico and Shadow of the Colossus, but it didn't modernise enough, making it a bit outdated. Plus, with many years in development, shifting from PS3 to PS4, it ended up feeling a bit rough around the edges. But despite all that, it's still loved for its emotional depth and the special bond between the boy and Trico. But overall, the technical flaws and slow gameplay overshadowed those positives for many players, leading to a mixed reception. By the late 90s, the point-and-click adventure genre was kind of dying out, and players were moving towards more 3D action games. So Grim Fandango was already fighting an uphill battle. Then the gameplay itself was a bit tricky. The puzzles could be quite tough, sometimes too tough, often needing walkthroughs to just figure them out. Plus, even in the remastered versions, the controls felt clunky and not very intuitive. But here's the interesting part. Despite the commercial flop, Grim Fandango got huge praise from critics and developed a loyal fanbase. Its story, characters, and world building really struck a chord. That's why they eventually remastered it in 2015. It clearly had a lot of love behind the scenes, even if the gameplay made it hard for some players to fully enjoy it at first. The Mad Max game had a lot going for it: impressive graphics, solid car combat, and a real love for the source material. But despite that, it didn't quite hit the mark commercially. And there are a couple of factors that played a role in this, but the main one was that they released on the same day as Metal Gear Solid, which hurt its sales. The open world also felt pretty repetitive. Doing the same activities across a lot of outposts started to wear thin. The story was also seen as pretty basic and didn't quite capture the depth of the Mad Max universe. There were plans for DLC, but those unfortunately got scrapped, which limited post-launch support and might have hurt its long-term appeal. It also faced comparisons to other open-world games using the Ubisoft-style formulas, lots of clearing outposts and repetitive missions, which some players found tiring. Even with these strengths, the issues kept the game from reaching its full potential, and many were unfortunately feeling underwhelmed. Last on our list is Beyond Good and Evil. Despite rave reviews and a devoted fanbase, it just didn't really take off commercially. It's considered a bit of a flop, and that mostly comes down to a few key issues. Poor marketing, a crowded market, and not so great release timing. While the game was praised for its unique world, interesting story, and varied gameplay, it struggled to reach mainstream players. Ubisoft admits they didn't do enough to promote it, which definitely hurt its visibility. Plus, it came out during a really busy period for gaming, with lots of big titles competing for attention. And although critics loved it, it just didn't get the recognition it deserved right away, which limited its sales and awareness. On top of that, the game's mix of action, stealth, puzzles, and adventure could feel a little bit confusing. Some players didn't quite know what to expect or where it fit. And all these factors combined meant that despite its quality, Beyond Good and Evil didn't reach the audience it deserved. And it's only over time that it's gained recognition as a cult classic. What do you think of our list? Were there any games missing? Leave me a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more like this, and I'll see you next time.